Some of the greatest heroes have confessed that just before they fell, they had a sinking. Had it been so with Peter at that moment, I would admit it. After all, this was the only man that the sea cook had feared. But Peter had no sinking. He had one feeling only, gladness, and he gnashed his pretty teeth with joy. Quick as thought, he snatched a knife from Hook's belt and was about to drive it home, when he saw that he was higher up the rock than his foe. It would not have been fighting fair. He gave the pirate a hand to help him up. It was then that Hook bit him. Not the pain of this, but its unfairness was what dazed Peter. It made him quite helpless. He could only stare, horrified. Every child is affected thus the first time he is treated unfairly. All he thinks he has a right to when he comes to you to be yours is fairness. After you have been unfair to him, he will love you again, but he will never afterward be quite the same boy. No one ever gets over the first unfairness. No one except Peter. He often met it, but he always forgot it. I suppose that was the real difference between him and all the rest. Those are the words of J.M. Barrie in Peter and Wendy, and this is The Red Pen. Hello and welcome back, Amanda. Nope, both of us. To The Red Pen, where we cut up fiction to see what it's made of.
Thanks for the warm welcome, Austin.
You're welcome. I'm glad that you're here with me. Unexpectedly and unusually.
Threw a wrench into the intro proceedings, and I appreciate that.
I like to keep things fresh here on The Red Pen, where we cut up fiction to see what it's made of. There. If that first one was too bad, you can use that one instead. No. Because it was really good.
No, I must save you, just speaking to me and not our listeners, for the rest of time. Then everyone knows that the only person who matters on this podcast is me, apparently. I don't know.
Well, hi. We're back. In the real world, it's been a long time since we recorded, and Snowpocalypse update, it's over. Spring killed it.
Fucking over.
Spring took a knife to the Snowpocalypse, and I couldn't be happier. The sun is shining. It was 80 degrees for a little while today. I sat on my porch in shorts and listened to the birds sing. The seasonal depression has been real this year, and I, for one, am overjoyed to see daylight.
I'm glad that you tore yourself away from frolicking through wet fields, just running around and enjoying the sunlight to record this episode of The Red Pen with me.
It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it.
Us. We got to do it.
It's us.
So what?
In case you were...
Fuck.
Hey, shut your mouth. This is my episode.
Do it.
I'm steering, and I want to steer us into some banter. Amanda, what are you reading lately?
Oh boy, I wasn't expecting this.
Yeah. It has been a long time since we recorded. Really throwing some curveballs at you.
What am I reading? Right now I'm rereading some Raymond Chandler novels because I'm going to do him for my next episode. So that's, and I'm reading Anne Leckie's The Raven Tower. I think that's what it's called. And I complained about this on Twitter.
I was going to say, that's what you called it on Twitter when you fucking dragged it.
I didn't mean to drag it that hard. I meant to just sort of tug it gently. Listen, I like Anne Leckie's books. I'm still not done with the ancillary, whatever that one's called. The trilogy of ancillaries. Not done with Ancillary Justice or whatever it's called. And that whole trilogy.
I like her books, whatever the fuck they are.
But my biggest problem is that there's a lot of overwriting, and the Raven Tower, while not sci-fi, it's strictly fantasy, is very overwritten, and the bigger stickler that I have is that it's in second person. So, while I am all for it and think that there's interesting things in it... Oh, and there's also I think the main protagonist is a trans dude. So, cool, mainstream fantasy trans protagonist, I'm all for it. And Leckie's a talented author. I'm really going to be behind this book, but it is like going to the dentist. Like for me personally, it is like, I know it's going to be worth it. And halfway through, I'll lose my irritation and anxiety about this fucking second person bullshit. I even bought the audiobook because I was like, maybe it'll make it better if someone reads it to me. But I found the audiobook narrator to be unpalatable.
Unpalpable. Couldn't feel him.
Couldn't feel them. Here I am in limbo with Leckie. So, what have you been reading? Like, I don't know the answer to that.
I'm enjoying this segment way more this year than I did last year when I wasn't reading for the first, 5 months of the year, because I've been reading consistently, which has been great. As Amanda knows, I'm reading the Farseer Trilogy by Hobb, and enjoying the fuck out of it. I haven't read, fantasy this dense and tropey since A Song of Ice and Fire, which I don't know if I've ever talked about on this program, that I actually really like A Song of Ice and Fire, the books, not the show. I appreciate some things about the show, but on the whole, I'm a books person.
You know what I appreciate about the show? The fact that it enabled Astalot to write a lot of Jamie and Brienne fan fiction. There we are. Woo woo.
There you. I'm so glad you managed to sneak that into this episode. We recently read a lot of Jamie and Brienne fan fiction and enjoyed the hell out of it.
Yep.
That's a good ship. Anyway, I am loving it, and I haven't had the experience of reading a 450-page book and being like, ooh, the next one's 600 pages. And I bet even less will happen in it in a long time.
Ooh, Dragon Robin Hobb, which I fully support.
But I'm so impressed, and so I enjoy it so much that literally the first book is the main character from ages 6 to 15, just in exhaustive detail. And yet it's so compelling, and I enjoyed it so much. If you are into that kind of fantasy, yeah.
Do it.
Get thee to this book.
So, Austin, I feel like we should give, I don't know if it's a caveat, or I don't know if this is a reader beware, but explain the circumstances under which you bought the first book.
Okay, yes. So we recently went out for karaoke with eternal friend of the show, Tracy Timmons Gray. After several drinks and 2 full hours of karaoke split between only 3 people in a room.
Honestly, I could have gone longer.
We could have. We were very powerful people, and we did a very good job. I sang Phantom of the Opera at more or less the tail end of that, and sounded great, at least to myself after 3 drinks. So then we staggered into a wonderful local bookstore, Elliott Bay, and proceeded to each spend somewhere north of $100.
Mostly on books we already owned.
Yes, we each bought a full hardback set of the Murderbot Diaries, and then I also bought A Descent of Monsters by J.Y. Yang, which I already owned an ebook and have already read, and Assassin's Apprentice, the first book in the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb.
Mostly because I was standing at the Robin Hobb section in fantasy making noises about how I loved and hated it.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you ripped it off the shelf and put it in my hands, and I, having had 3 drinks, immediately said, I'll buy it.
No, that's not what happened. Your drunken haze has lied to you. I was making noises about them and how they had tormented my soul for years. And you went, which one would I start with if I were to start? And I went, and I guess this one, because it is literally the first book in that verse. And then you were like, okay, and then bought it.
I guess we'll never know what the truth is.
Tracy Timmons Gray, time to tweet at the show.
Tracy, don't you dare.
Don't expose him for this. So I really actually quite enjoy I endorse the Robin Hobb books with massive caveats, especially because I feel like that series should have ended before it technically did. And she wrote a follow-up trilogy that she should have just never touched. This is my opinion. One day, when Austin is done with the 6 books I have allotted him from this verse, we're gonna do an episode about it.
I'm very excited.
I'm very excited too, honestly.
I did want to mention one other thing that I just read last night, because I'm super hyped. This past weekend was Emerald City Comic Con, and as usual, I was there throwing my money at comics. And one that I picked up that has been out for a while, and I do not know why I haven't bought it before this. Yes, Roya.
Yes.
Yes, Roya is by C. Spike Trotman and Emilee Denich, and it is phenomenal, smutty, It's phenomenal. I enjoyed it so much. It is a smutty graphic novel set in the 1960s about comic artists and features a kinky threesome, and it's all about femdom, and it's just pure and wonderful and delightful.
So, hey, Austin, you maybe want to tell people what this episode is about, because I just realized we never did that. Woo!
Oh, no, I cut you off at the pass there and took a hard right into things that really have nothing to do with the topic of this episode at all. We're here to talk about Peter Pan in a shocking twist that no one expected from me.
So, if you're not aware for some weird reason...
Everyone knows, Amanda.
I mean, there's got to be somebody who finds this on iTunes and is like, I'll listen to it, and then stops 5 minutes in when I am ranting about second person. Austin wrote a queered Peter Pan... I don't want to say a retelling, sequel?
Yeah.
More or less. Peter Pan take called Peter Darling that I acquired and edited. Was one of the editors on. There's no good way to explain what I did to that book. Except made you take out the talking sharks.
I don't plan to talk a ton about Peter Darling in this episode because I'll be embarrassed. I don't particularly want this to be like a
you thing?
A me thing, yeah, because I love Peter Pan, and I mean, I wrote a book about it, and I have a lot of feelings on many different adaptations of Peter Pan, and the one that I particularly want to frame this about is the original novel, which is, in fact, not the original version of the story, but it is the version that a lot of Peter Pan mythos comes from. I want to talk about the ways that the legacy of that book has endured, and also the things that I think have not resonated as much or gotten lost as years have gone on, as well as the 90 million adaptations and spins and twists on Peter Pan. I can't think of many other stories that were written after 1900 that on a whim, like I sat down and just started listing out all of the different versions of Peter Pan that I could think of off the top of my head. And it was a long list. This character is all over the place, in many cases thanks to Disney. The ideas of the story are also all over the place. It's a very embedded, you have things like Peter Pan syndrome, used to describe primarily men who are in some ways adolescent as adults. You have Peter Pan peanut butter. You have the enduring popularity of the Disney film. You have the entire Tinkerbell franchise. Still the stage and musical adaptations and new ones all the time. You have Peter Pan popping up in Kingdom Hearts. You have Once Upon a Time.
Oh, man.
You have Peter Pan 2003, the best version. And then you have many, many novelizations. It's humbling as a person who has written a book about Peter Pan to go on Goodreads and look at how many, I found a Goodreads list once of just how many adaptations of Peter Pan there are. It was at least 100. That was on that list.
Yeah, there's a lot.
There are probably more.
I was talking about this to you in the pre-prep, but I don't know why I keep calling it the pre-prep. I guess technically it was, because it was over Facebook.
That's true. We prepped in many places at many times.
I was talking to you about how it, I think, resembles a modern myth more than almost any other sort of franchise or series I can think of. I guess Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I would say Lord of the Rings is more of a modern myth. But still, Peter Pan is such a baked-in part of Western culture that I thought I knew everything about it, and I had not read the book until I was 25.
And so many ideas come from it that are now very divorced from the original, the concept of Neverland. A lot of popular depictions of fairies come from this book. A lot of popular depictions of pirates come from this book. It's all over the place, as well as many sort of quotes and concepts and ideas about childhood and the loss of childhood and the tragedy or cruelty of childhood, so on and so forth. It's all over the place. So I wanted to talk about that and what I find interesting about the original story, as well as why I think this story is particularly resonant with queer readers. Again, not to call myself out, but after I published Peter Darling, and even when I was working on it, so many people reached out to me to say I'm trans and Peter Pan was the character I identified with as a kid. I'm queer and this story has always stuck with me in a particular way, and clearly it stuck with me as well. So I think there's interesting stuff to examine there.
I can't believe that this great lead up to the meat of our episode, you failed to mention my favorite adaptation of Peter Pan.
I forgot Hook.
You forgot Hook, the most important to me.
I found out while I was researching today that Hook is an authorized adaptation of Peter Pan.
Oh, wow.
There's a lot of authorized adaptations of Peter Pan. One of the interesting things that I don't really have any other place to put this factoid about Peter Pan is that the copyright was not left to... A lot of the properties were left to J.M. Barrie's secretary when he died, but some of I believe it's the stage play and maybe a couple of the other rights were left to a children's hospital in the UK and continues to, like, make huge amounts of money for them. Its continuing legacy directly sort of benefits a children's hospital, which is pretty cool.
That's also a kind of a plot point in the movie Hook.
Hey.
Is my help with this episode just going to be a lot of
you forgot about
also
Hook?
The movie Hook?
Maybe so. Time will tell. I didn't see Hook growing up. My first brush with Peter Pan, as I think is true for many people, was Disney. Followed when I was probably 10 by the 2003 live-action adaptation, and many, many, many years later by the actual book Peter and Wendy by J.M. Barrie, which I'm going to hop into now. J.M. Barrie was a novelist and playwright who, born 1860, died 1937. His first introduction of Peter Pan as a character was actually in an adult novel that he wrote called The Little White Bird, and he was just in a couple chapters, and that was published in 1902. A couple years later, he wrote a stage play, Peter Pan, or The Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up. After that had been very popular for a while, he also wrote a novel called Peter and Wendy, which is in many ways what we think of as the Peter Pan canon, but in also many ways the stage play tends to be a little closer. A lot of what people associate with the book is also true or more true of the stage play. And part of that is because the book would not have been what it was if not for the stage play, which is something I find really neat about it. If you read this book now, you'll notice that it is one of those books that is really fun to read aloud, and the narrator talks to the reader throughout a lot of it in a very, like, a parent reading to a child or a mentor to a child, like these funny asides and criticisms of the characters. It's clearly a story that's meant to be read aloud and sort of performed, even if just one-on-one. That grew out of the way that the stage play was. The stage play was modified during its run quite a bit based on what the audiences wanted, what would be more fun to the kids. So, like, Captain Hook wasn't in it originally, but it wanted a villain, so Captain Hook was invented, and all of these sort of, what do I want to call them? Things that you now associate with the stage play. When Tinker Bell dies and it goes like, clap your hands if you believe in fairies. That's kind of a weird moment in the book because it's like, okay, and then all the children,
just put this
and
book
then
down.
all the children in the world clap their hands, and it's sort of like a short moment in the book. Peter's like, clap your hands, kids, please, my fairy's dying. And then it's like, and then the kids clap. And then the fairy came back to life. Obviously, in the stage play, that is the moment where he turns to the audience and says, clap your hands if you believe in fairies. And the whole audience erupts until Tinkerbell erupts and cries until Tinkerbell comes back to life. So it has all these dramatic flourishes and this style that really came out of the stage, which is something that is really cool. And then the flow of this story in the public consciousness goes from chapter in a novel to stage play to novel to stage play to musical to film to stage play again to more film. It flows throughout all these different mediums, and I think the reason that it works in so many mediums is because it has that very performative aspect of it. It's a story that is meant to be told, not that is meant to be sort of quietly consumed. It's a very funny, very engaging story that is meant to kind of like pull an audience in and make them feel part of it, and it's very entertaining. It's kind of a unique narrative form in that way. I still think like it still holds up, barring some troubling aspects, which, don't worry, I won't skip. It holds up as like a very entertaining read. It's extremely funny and extremely weird, and it's, you can get it for free, so if you're interested, don't hesitate to check it out. My caveat there, obviously, is it's fucking racist, and also, like, deeply gender essentialist. If I could excise one thing from all the fucking adaptations of Peter Pan, it's like, you really don't need to put his caricatures of Native American people in your stories anymore. You could just not.
It's weird.
Just not
that's still occasionally happening. Like, I would have thought that they would have taken it out in, I don't know, Pan. No, they didn't.
Like the 2015 Pan, which just introduces like Rooney Mara as Tiger Lily. Why do we have to fucking do this?
It also introduced, which gave our friend of the show, Simone, a wheezing attack. I actually don't know how she reacted, but
I think that's
definitely has a scene where the pirates are at, like, I don't know, pirate camp. I don't know what the fuck the pirates are doing. I'm not seeing that movie. Anyway, they break into fucking Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit as like a pirate chorus.
Yeah. And it apparently like was ad-libbed and they kept it.
They did it while they were in Pirate Boot Camp. That's where I got Pirate Boot Camp from. And like somebody just started singing it and then they all sang it, and
they
the
started
director
recording. But to continue to sort of dig into Peter Pan the novel, one of the things I find really interesting is that it has become so enduring in the public consciousness, even though it is objectively a fucking weird little book. It's very short. It's extremely strange. There's a lot of aspects of it that aren't in the public consciousness because they're too fucking weird. Everything in it is very, very imaginary. Like, not just when they get to Neverland, but the moment the book starts, like, you're in J.M. Barrie's storytelling world and things get weird.
You boarded the ride.
And the whole thing is like, it is a story made up of stories made up of stories. Everything is anthropomorphized. The world is alive. Like, he goes off into tangents about why are the stars? Why are stars out there and why are they in the sky? And then the next minute it'll be, do you know how sometimes like you wake up and your thoughts are all better ordered and stuff? That's because your mother's job at night is to go into your mind and air out your thoughts and put away the bad ones and take out the nice ones and lay them out for you to put on in the morning. And this is the style that the entire book is written in. It's just filled with these kind of fascinating tangents, and sometimes it'll just fucking go off. Like, there's a part that haunts me, frankly, where it's talking about the fact that the Neverland in Peter Pan is not meant to be like the universal Neverland. It's not like a place. It's not like a real thing. The Neverland of Peter Pan is specifically comes from the imaginations of Peter, or of Wendy and John and Michael, the three children. There's an idea that it's a little different for each of them. And so it's going into like the ways each of them experience Neverland. And it's like John had lots of friends, and Wendy had a wolf for a friend, and Michael had friends only at night. And I'm just, what do you mean, James?
Don't you all have night friends?
What do you mean?
I have night friends.
What is that?
Night friends. They visit me every night.
Oh, man. Another sidebar, like, everyone in the book is named after a real person. I think a lot of people know this, that J.M. Barrie was friends with a family that had 5 boys. One of them, the youngest, was Peter, or at least the youngest when he was writing the book. I think the others may have been younger. And the character of Peter Pan was originally conceived as a way of entertaining Peter's older brothers by saying, like, oh, all babies are part bird and he might fly away out of his cradle. Again, J.M. Barrie, by all accounts, a weird dude, but like very good at entertaining kids with his weird shit.
Extremely imaginative.
Yeah.
You have to give props for that. I mean, there's some wild ass shit in there, and I approve.
I approve of it. And Peter's brothers were named John and Michael, and one of them was George, which is Mr. Darling's name in canon. J.M. Barrie's wife's name was Mary, which is Mrs. Darling's name in canon. Character of Peter was partially based on Peter Llewellyn Davies, but was also in part based on J.M. Barrie's older brother, David, I think, who died when he was 13. And so a lot of it is this sort of, I mean, I think that that's part of what comes through in the story. It's very much based on his making the real world more fantastical and continually adding on more and more layers of, you know, weird explanations for why things are the way they are, or just sort of whimsical twists on the way the world really is. And I think that's why, for all that Peter Pan is this sort of very whimsical story, it does feel like it's always riffing on things that are real, and it feels very grounded in things that are real. Namely, the concept of childhood.
Yeah, J.M. Barrie made up a lot of shit, but he did not make up childhood and how strange it is.
A lot of what I find fun about the structure of Peter and Wendy is that it really mimics the way that kids tell stories. It has that same kind of meandering strangeness and the ability to sort of jump topics and concepts at will. It's also full of commentary on youth and childhood and childishness, because Peter Pan, as we probably all know, is the kid who can never grow up, and everybody else in the story is all the people who do choose to grow up. And so there's a lot in it about what it means to choose society and conventionality and quote unquote like real life, basically, to choose, adult sexuality and romance and relationships, and what it means to choose that over childhood, and what it would mean if you rejected that completely and stayed a child forever. The quote I picked for the opening one is very much one of those like very vulnerable moments where, he frames Peter as being able to get over the experiences that shape all of us into grown-up people who are in many ways, jaded and have experienced harm or have experienced hardship. He has the ability to just put that aside over and over and over again. He doesn't fear pain. He doesn't fear death. He doesn't fear loss because he forgets everything in order to maintain that. That's part of why that character has remained so enduring, I think, is this fascination with the fantasy of that.
But I feel like when you're a kid, Peter Pan is just this example of fantastic adventures that you can get up to if you had essentially superpowers and powers of imagination. You can fly, you can throw temper tantrums, you have a fairy for a best friend, you have all these boys that you're sort of in charge of. And then when you get older, you start to see the tragedy in Peter Pan, and like the things that you want come at a cost, and that would be like forgetting everything that could change you. And also how surface level Peter's existence is. So on one hand, it's like, yes, to be a child is so full of magic and wonder until you realize that to be a child forever robs you of a deeper experience. I just feel like that's one of the other reasons why Peter Pan has been so enduring as a character, because he matters to little kids and to old people like me.
Yeah, it's interesting too that the Disney version is probably the most enduring version of this story, and the Disney version is the one that kind of drains that away the most. It's there, but Disney doesn't really encourage you to think like, oh, what a tragedy Peter Pan is. He's
more of a brat.
Yeah, and he's kind of like, he's the eternal child and the eternal fantasy in that form. Like, it doesn't really encourage you to critique the notion of staying a child forever. It's more like he's always there, having a good time in Neverland, and you can still sort of imagine yourself there too, and, every child gets to go away and be in Neverland for a while. I think that's why, like, so many adaptations of Peter Pan, I'll get into this more later, but, like, so many edgy adaptations of Peter Pan try to be like, I'm gonna flip that on its head and talk about how Peter Pan sucks. That's the literal least edgy take you could have on Peter Pan. That's the book. That's what the book is about.
Trust me, they already did that.
J.M. Barrie thought about that, actually, because the book is full of these moments that I think would probably go over the head of most kids, or at least, get filed away in the, like, subconscious of vulnerability and tragedy of that character, and cruelty. He not only will never develop a thicker skin about pain because he only experiences it once for himself, he also forgets the names of his old companions and his old enemies. Canonically, Tinkerbell fucking dies after... I just have to underline this one really quick. Canonically, there's an epilogue that is what Return to Neverland is based on, the Disney sequel to Peter Pan, where Peter comes and meets Wendy's daughter, and he is devastated that Wendy has grown up without him, and then tells her that he doesn't remember who Captain Hook is. And Tinkerbell, he doesn't remember either, and he's like, yeah, she probably fucking died. Fairies don't live that long. You get this glimpse of someone who can only, maintain this sort of idealized childhood by giving up all of these things and losing them. And in addition to that, he is also extremely callous and extremely cruel. He's at least implied in the original to kill or banish the lost boys if they ever grow up on him. When he's flying the kids to Neverland at the beginning, he keeps, like, almost letting them die and then rescuing them. And it specifically points out, like, he seemed more into, proving how cool he was that he could rescue them than actually preserving human life. He can't understand consequences. He can't understand passage of time. Like, he's missing out on a huge chunk of life. And then there's, of course, the implication, like, he can never have a family, he can never have a lover, like, he can never become mature enough to have any of these things.
He's the epitome of the most limiting parts of childhood.
The thing that always just cracks me up about, like, really edgy takes on Peter Pan is that they all tend to start from the premise of, like, what if he was a bad man who, like, kidnapped children and didn't care about their lives? And it's like, that's what Peter Pan is.
Cool. You just wrote, like, slightly edgier.
I'm gonna throw a lot of shade in this episode because I think a lot of edgy adaptations of Peter Pan are supremely missing the point. It's the classic thing where somebody is like, I'm gonna make this mature, therefore I'm gonna add, like, gore to it. And it's like, you haven't made the actual themes of this remotely more mature than they were. These are the exact same themes. All you've added is, like, what if a kid was stabbed? And it's like, that's nasty. Yeah, what you've described is upsetting.
Thanks for making a nasty book.
That's upsetting, but, like, it's nothing that isn't already implied by the existence of this character. The only thing that is preventing that from being on the table in Peter Pan the original is, what is considered appropriate for the audience and the narrative framing. You dragging in more violence doesn't really change it. He already, like, cut off a dude's hand and threw it to a crocodile, and then threw that guy to the crocodile. He is already a murderer.
The content of the books and the themes of the books are already appropriately sophisticated. Just because you think this thing is primarily aimed at children, it is, doesn't mean that it doesn't have self-awareness. You're not telling, like, the ghost of J.M. Barrie fucking anything.
J.M. Barrie knew what he was about. The whole book is filled with that. The ending, it implies a very tragic cycle for Peter, where he continues to meet, Wendy's child, and then her grandchild, and then her great-grandchild, and have to forget the relationships that he has with each one, and start over and over again, because he can never have a more mature relationship with them. That's fucked up.
Yeah, it's brutal.
It's also a very funny book, though. It's extremely enjoyable. I don't mean to imply that it's super grim to read, because it's not. It's hilarious. I wanted to quickly also throw a dart, though, at why I think this story is resonant for queers like us. And I wrote a blog post specifically about why I think it's resonant for trans folks specifically, but I think it applies more broadly to queer folks as well. Like, I think there's a lot to be said for the idea that being queer and being cut off from many types of adult society and from the institutions of that society is in a way being sort of confined to a childhood. You can look at it that way, at least. I think there's a lot to be said for this character representing, freedom and kind of like a fuck you to adult cishet society, and like, I'm gonna go off to my Neverland and fly around. I also think that there's a lot to be found there in the feelings of abandonment and isolation, on the outside of that institution. Peter Pan is locked out of Wendy's home at the end, watching her get to grow up and have a family and a life of her own. Especially, I think, because I mentioned before, deeply gender essentialist. I just want to highlight for a moment, like, just how much so. For one thing, this is something that folks who know the stage play would already know. Captain Hook and Mr. Darling are played by the same actor, traditionally speaking. And there's a lot of parallels between those two characters. So Wendy's father and also the villain of Neverland. And then John, her brother, is also implied to, like, act like Mr. Darling throughout. And then Wendy is, like, the splitting image of her mother, and her daughter is the splitting image of her, and her granddaughter is the splitting image of her. What I'm putting out here is that there are, like, two people in this story.
It's true.
There's man and there's woman, and then there's Peter, who is a child. Every woman in the story is, in a very sexist way, assumed to basically act from the same principles, and so is every man. Every woman in the story is in love with Peter. Michael, who is also a child, also imitates Peter and then grows up to be a real man. Everyone becomes a husband or a wife. Everybody raises 2 to 3 children.
Some of them go to Neverland and go through the same cycle.
Yeah, but everyone, like, that's what I find kind of interesting is, like, it basically implies this extremely rigid society that basically just loops on itself in almost the same way that Peter is looping on them. So I think, especially given that, the fantasy of Peter Pan as this character who is kind of outside of that, this very, very narrow imagining of what people are and what they want, because obviously all they want is to grow up and be straight people in straight marriages with children. And that's the whole of society, apparently.
It's at least the idealized.
With minor deviations, but like that's literally all you see on screen ever outside of Neverland. So I think Neverland sort of becomes a catch-all, and Peter becomes a hero for this idea of like, what else? What are the other options? Like, what if I fall out of my pram and fly away and fight pirates for the rest of my life?
What if I just see myself out of the simulation?
Yeah, what if I never grow up this way? What is the other option? In canon, it's kind of like, well, there isn't.
Yeah, it's
or
not
like,
real.
It's not like a good option that it presents, but especially given, like the Disney versions where it's not quite as grim, I think that becomes especially appealing if that resonates with you.
The strongest connection I have to the Peter Pan like lore is first the movie Hook, starring Robin Williams, and second, your book, because I was actually not a huge fan of the Disney version, and I didn't like the 2003 version except for Jason Isaacs. So my relationship with that mythos, like the Peter Pan mythos, is so specific, and it's really interesting. Although the two things that are important from the Disney Peter Pan, the OG animated, one, there's a ride at Disney that's actually kind of fun.
I want to go.
And two, I need to take you. And two, there's the gif of the crocodile slapping the
Yes.
water well. That one's real good.
That
enduring legacy.
The literal entire time I was working on Peter, darling, I had da 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 like stuck in my head the entire time. It is so catchy.
It is a very good musical cue, and it says so much about its character because it's Peter's theme, basically. Mm-hmm. Because I interrupted you anyway.
Carry on.
Do you want to talk about the movie Hook with Robin Williams? Or do you want to talk about...
I would love to talk about Hook. Not least because now we're going to get into less academic and more personal territory. I have very strong feelings about what is and is not an appropriate adaptation of Captain Hook. And Hook is one of them.
Wait, inappropriate or
appropriate?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have, since then I found out that Dustin Hoffman is actually kind of a shitheel. So like, this is one of those things, this is one of those things where I'm like, okay, I love this as a child and it has to be important to me because of that. But every time I like see any part of Hook from Hook now, I'm just like, However, it is notable because Dustin Hoffman and Bob Hoskins kind of looked at each other, according to one of them in some article, and went, they're like a queer couple, right? Like Hook and Shmee are Shmee. Hook and Smee are a fucking queer couple, right? And that's how they played it. And that, I mean, in retrospect, yes. The things about Hook that are so great to me are, one, it's just a charming movie and I saw it when I was a child. Apparently, I demanded my mother take me to it like 5 times while it was in theaters. More importantly than that, it does even though it's like a family movie and it's not the best, it does a couple of things right. It pretty much took out all of the fucking bullshit racist Native American crap.
Good. Thanks. Really don't feel like it's that hard to do. Other adaptations of Peter Pan.
It's not there. Because it's not needed. There's like a weird sexy part where adult Peter falls into the water in Neverland and gets like breath put in his lungs by sexy glittery mermaids.
Oh yeah. I forgot about that part.
Good and weird and very important to me as a child. One of the things that I liked about it, and like a lot of people apparently didn't like Julia Roberts as Tinkerbell, but I liked that Tinkerbell spoke because there ain't a lot of female characters who, if you don't have Wendy as your main, because Wendy is now Granny Wendy, and her daughter Moira is who Peter married Moira, came back checked on Wendy as Wendy grew up, and then finally, her granddaughter Moira, I'm sorry, married her granddaughter Moira. Moira and Granny Wendy are once Peter leaves for Neverland again, are stuck back in 1990s London, but Peter's having the adventure, and the only main female character you see a lot of is Tinkerbell, who speaks and is in love with Peter, and his daughter as well. His daughter's in it, but like she's made less important by the narrative. She's just there to like resist the pirates more than Peter's son Jack does, which there's a whole weird with adult eyes, the whole thing of like Hook grooming Peter's son to like dress like him, and like was gonna give him an piercing with the fucking tip of his hook, and then like it's weird and wild. It's weird. And then, so the movie is deeply enjoyable and nostalgic to me. And I think that it was a good choice to like give us an idea of how Peter Pan as an adult could be, but circa 1990s.
I mean, literal perfect casting for Robin Williams, right?
Yeah, I love Hook, and it is a deeply important to me version. So anything for me when I was navigating the world of like Peter Pan adaptations, like anything that directly contradicted Hook, I was just like, Like, this is the canon now. For me, that was the 2003 Peter Pan, which came out, like I said, when I was 10 and was definitely formative because Jason Isaacs is so hot as Captain Hook. He's so fucking hot in it. Oh my God.
Listen, it's
upsetting.
Good. And what I realized later when I finally actually read the book is it is probably, of the adaptations I have read, it is by far the most faithful to the book. It is much more faithful than the Disney version, even than Hook. And it has those sort of emotional drops like the book does. And it's not as sad as the book is in parts, but it definitely captures that sense of tragedy. They wanted to make Jeremy Sumpter as Peter Pan a little bit more of a teen heartthrob. So like he gets to like canonically be in love with someone and not be quite so heartless. But
they also, I feel like they made him a little, like he's a little too old and a little too sexy. And I feel weird saying that about like a literal teenager, but he just seemed very...
Well, they kind
styling
of,
was,
they do that. The movie did that. They definitely like wanted to make him like teen heartthrob status,
palpable to kids, palpable to, like, the youth. Yep. Also, I'm going to rewind and put this in my Hook portion, but the things that it did to me in order to make me invested in that storyline, like it managed to terrify the shit out of me as a child. Because there's the scene where Peter and his wife and Granny Wendy had gone off to the hospital, which apparently she was like a benefactor of. It was like renamed the Granny Wendy Children's Hospital or Foundation or something. Well, he's gone. Hook comes and kidnaps his kid. And when he gets back, the house is dark and windows have been shattered and there's deep gouge marks in the wall and the music is so fucking ominous. And you go up the stairs and the housekeeper is there and they're asking her what happened and she's just like, the children were screaming. And I don't know how they managed to put that in a children's movie,
Good
but
Lord.
they did, and it was scary. Although the actual scene that you see of the kids being taken isn't quite to that level. It's just, and there's something so like, I'm glad that a movie that on paper is just like, oh yeah, it's a kid's movie about grown-up Peter Pan, like having to go back to Neverland and relearn how to fly and how to be Peter Pan because he's forgotten all of it. I'm glad that they let parts of it be genuinely scary and genuinely touching, like the stuff with his kids was actually pretty good. Also that they let him try and hit Tinkerbell with a rolled up newspaper because he thought she was like a firefly from hell. Like, I'm glad that all of those things were present.
I find Hook really, really interesting and really neat because it kind of epitomizes for me like people's like grown-up reactions to Peter Pan. Yeah. Because it is so much about like, what if what happened to Peter Pan was what happens to all of us? You know, like what if Peter had to go through everything that we do, and what if we, like Peter, could go back to Neverland and like learn how to like laugh and be young again and relate to children, fly.
Yeah, because the point is literally he's like an absent, neglectful father, and then he risks losing his children and can't save them as the grown-up man that he is and has to relearn. And it's like, ooh, that's powerful if you're a person who feels like you've lost touch with the things that made you, I don't know, emotional or special in childhood. I feel like I've lost a lot of that as I've gotten older, and the idea of a catharsis for that or a vehicle for that is really powerful.
Yeah, because I've talked a lot about the negative things that Peter represents, but he's also like, he represents unbridled joy and courage and adventure and you know, who you would be if you didn't think about consequences. I think that's why that character is so beloved. I think that character being so beloved is also directly why people are so into making like edgy versions of him where he's just like a murderer with a knife. It's like, okay, but what if actually...
what if he tarnished Peter Pan's image? It's like,
what if he wore all black and skulked through the night?
What if you wore a trench coat?
Oh, shit.
Oh, before you move on, because I hear you taking the breath, I have one more Peter Pan reference that you don't know.
Go.
It's so silly. You know almost nothing about the Jonas Brothers, where unfortunately I know too much. And they had a song called Fly With Me that has kind of a Peter Pan theme. And every time I listen to it, and it's been a while, it's been a hot minute, every time I listen to it, I like cry at the irony because the lyric in the chorus is Peter Pan and Wendy turned out fine. And I feel like upon
by what metric?
Yeah. Did they turn out fine?
I mean, I get like Wendy turned out fine.
Yeah, like Wendy's fine by a metric of fine.
By a metric.
She joined like cishet society and like
Peter didn't turn out anything is sort of the point.
Peter's still doing
didn't
shit
change in any way, shape, or form.
It's like, but the implication there is that like Peter Pan and Wendy. Hook. This is Hook's song fic. It reminds me again of the cultural impression of Peter Pan that maybe people have, that like Peter Pan and Wendy flew off into the sunset together somehow, even though she very clearly went back to her life. Or that like maybe somewhere Peter Pan and Wendy are still zooming around Neverland. I don't understand why that is the takeaway for a lot of people, but I guess arguably it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's a strong, and again, I think, sexist implication, certainly in the Disney version and even the 2003 version, that like Peter goes off and remains this same person and Wendy loves him forever.
Yeah,
like,
which is kind of, I feel like Wendy at a certain, like, let's say Wendy at 45 is just like, shit.
Like she, and I think there is a strong implication in all versions that at the very least she remembers him forever. And she cares for the memory of him, but like she very explicitly rejects him and rejects his way of being.
Yeah, she literally locks the door on him.
Also, this is, I feel, like a good place as any to throw this in here. Wendy is the main character, and I think that people sort of neglect that. Like, the framing of the story is literally all through, like it's through Wendy, and it's through her experiences, her, you know, nature as a storyteller. She is the one of her siblings who tells the story of Peter Pan, and who summons him, and she's the one that he wants to bring to Neverland. She's the one who wakes up in Neverland and takes them out. And the book is even framing the first line. I'll just pull it up. The first line that many people know is, all children except one grow up. The second line is, they soon know that they will grow up, and the way Wendy knew was this. One day, when she was 2 years old, she was playing in a garden, and she plucked another flower and ran with it to her mother. I suppose she must have looked rather delightful, for Mrs. Darling put her hand to heart and cried, "Oh, why can't you remain like this forever?" This was all that passed between them on the subject, but henceforth Wendy knew that she must grow up. You always know after you are 2. 2 is the beginning of the end.
Fucking mic drop.
Later on, like, this is towards the very end of the book, pre-epilogue, but like after Wendy returns home, it's said that, you know, don't feel sad for her that she chose to grow up. She wanted it so much that she grew up a day faster than all the other children.
But again, like,
she
such a weird...
explicitly rejects... Oh, it's weird. But she explicitly rejects what Peter is and keeps him as sort of... She is able to sort of straddle the line and, like, keep him in her heart as a fond memory and maintain this sort of, you know, loveliness of youth and fondness for that. But they don't get together, y'all.
They don't turn out fine, Nick Jonas.
She goes off and, like, marries some guy and has a kid.
Has kids who have kids.
And then she can't go back to Neverland.
Yeah, you're not allowed if you're over, what, I don't know, 12? Puberty? I don't know.
It's pretty young, really.
I don't actually know.
You lose it pretty early, apparently, according to Peter Pan.
I'd be fascinated to find out.
Peter is implied to be a lot of different ages. Like I mentioned, he's based on J.M. Barrie's brother, who was 13 when he died, but he's often implied to be younger than that. He's said to, like, still have all his baby teeth, which is a weird, again, kind of a weird thing that it emphasizes as the reason women love him.
That's so fucking wild.
This book is fucking strange. It's actually kind of weird if you read Peter and Wendy, how much the Peter Pan canon has sort of solidified. Every part of this story is so recognizable now, from Peter to Tinkerbell to Wendy to Neverland itself, Captain Hook, the Jolly Roger, like, they're all of these sort of cultural symbols at this point, but really explicitly in canon, none of it is really real, and none of it is meant to be that constant. It's not like, as I mentioned, Neverland is something that changes all the time, depending on who's there. The contents of Neverland are based on the mind of the child that's experiencing it. The places they go and the things that are there, it's all just this sort of mishmash of a fantasy. John likes flamingos. This is another just sort of aside from the book. John likes flamingos, so his Neverland has lots of flamingos in it. Why not, John? Live your fucking truth.
Live your flamingo
John, darling. Wendy's got her fucking pet wolf, I guess. Which is awesome. Literally never mentioned again. It's one time. The whole contents of Neverland in the book are always shifting, and they just sort of pop up to prop up whatever's happening in the story at that moment. You've got like killer mermaids and weird birds with giant nests that you can use as boats. Basically whatever is convenient in the moment. And like, again, canonically, Captain Hook dies and isn't there anymore, and Tinkerbell dies. And Wendy leaves and grows up, and all the Lost Boys leave and grow up. And the only constant in that whole reality is Peter and the existence of Neverland as a place. I think it's interesting that character and that place have become so solid, I guess.
Yeah, culturally, they're very delineated.
Yeah, it's not like the concept of Neverland has been solidified. It's like this specific one. And with these specific characters in it, this is always the cast. Like, these are the enduring beloved characters. But I think at the same time, people still kind of do project all of those things onto Neverland. It's supposed to be kind of a playground, and that's the dream of it. Peter Pan is this sort of whimsical sprite who takes you off on adventures with this pirate, or whatever you want to do, wherever you want to go. I feel like the spirit of that is why it has remained popular, but it's interesting that it's the cast. It's the specific cast. It's like the Disney cast of characters is what has remained.
That makes a lot of sense. Disney's the primary source for most people, so the things that are in Disney are the most recognizable, and therefore a lot of the things that get propagated or even subverted are rooted in the Disney rather than in the books or even the stage plays.
Disney is what most people are riffing on when they think of Peter Pan, even though Disney is also riffing on Peter Pan.
Yep, it's like an impression of an impression.
I think that also explains the popularity of some of the edgier Peters. It's like, suck it, Disney. It's like, he's cool now. He wasn't cool before, but now he knifes people. This is a subtweet of Once Upon a Time.
Is that the name of the episode? Did you just stagger?
Yeah.
Did you just dagger?
Because I gotta say, listen, hey everyone, it's okay if you like Once Upon a Time. I hate that show.
I hate it. There's things about it that I like Swan Queen is a cool idea. Everything else, I'm just like, burn it to the ground.
I have as I mentioned, extremely strong feelings about legitimate Captain Hook. Young ones with
young, sexy
like, perfectly
ones?
done eyeliner who are like conventionally handsome. No, they can all leave.
They can all just go cosplay somewhere else.
They also, hey, Pan 2015, they can't be blonde. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. Whatever the fuck they thought they were doing in that movie, where he's just like a conventionally handsome blonde guy who's friends with this 10-year-old, and they promise to be friends forever. Read the summary of this movie, and then scream. As I did. What they did hilariously in that movie is they made Blackbeard, quote unquote, basically Captain Hook.
Yeah, I know.
Because you need that fucking character. But they were like, what if Captain Hook just wasn't Captain Hook? Cool idea.
Get rid of your shitty racist
and
character.
Sings Smells Like Teen Spirit. What a cool idea you had.
Great job,
Anyway.
that movie. Fucking universally panned movie. Ah, panned!
Hey, well done.
Nice.
Universally panned, that's another good title.
I like, that might be it. Before you resume, I thought of another important Peter Pan moment in my life, and that was the first time I went to Disney World as a 5-year-old. My mom spent a lot of money on that, like, dine with the characters shit, and one of the characters was I'll link the picture of what the Captain Hook Disney people had to wear at those character breakfasts because they're terrifying. And somewhere in the ether is pictures of me having a fucking meltdown because I'm being forced to stand next to like a 6-foot tall puppet looking like it's bad.
Oh no.
Captain Hook. And my mom was just like, great. I spent a lot of money on this and I traumatized my child. Cool. Taking pictures of it, so this will be funny later.
Have you ever watched any of the Tinkerbell movies?
Yes, I've seen one of them. They're actually
I've seen 3.
Of course you have.
I watched 2 as a young person. Well, it was high school. I won't pretend.
Live your truth.
And then at some point I was having a night in college and I watched The Pirate Fairy. They're actually pretty delightful, and I enjoy that Tinkerbell has gone on to be a beloved character as well, especially because she talks, actually, in most of the Tinkerbell movies. Well, all of them, I hope. So do all of her female friends, her little fairy friends. Yeah, I enjoyed those. My super faves of all of the Peter Pans out there in the universe are definitely the original with all of its problems, but also all of its weird humor and fucked up shit. The 2003 adaptation, which remains influential on me mostly because of Jason Isaacs.
How horny you are for that Captain Hook.
Hey, that's true. And also Lost Boy by BOI by Sassafras Lowery, which is a modern non-magic retelling of it. It's interesting if you've read the original book because it's like a chapter by chapter retelling while being extremely different. That is about homeless queer youth and is a devastating, I'll use that word primarily, but extremely good. And also very good on the Pan Hook side of things.
I remember you finding out that book exists while you were already deep in a draft of PD, and you were just like, shit, I want to read this now, but I can't. I
know, I was like, I want to read this for inspiration, but also I absolutely can't do that. Yeah. So I just, after I finished Peter Darling, I just went on a spree because in the process of writing it, I found out how many fucking other adaptations of Peter Pan there were. So I just dove in head first after that and went whole hog on Peter Pan mythos for a while. Lost Boy was definitely my favorite of those.
I think I bought it for you.
You did, yes. It lives on my favorites shelf.
Yes, I've seen it. It has a lovely cover as well.
It's a very beautiful book. Those are my recommendations out of this. If my book recs.
So my recommendation is just watch the movie Hook.
And then please tweet Amanda about it. She's so hungry. She needs it so much.
I sometimes I just wake up and yell "Good Morning Neverland" like Smee does in that movie. That's how deeply ingrained it is in me.
I should have done an entire episode on queer-coded Smee.
Oh, Smee.
There's a lot to that.
Shmee.
Next time we'll talk about the eternal gay Smee.
The Eternal Gay Smee is the other title.
Also, with Disney's current sort of trajectory, I feel like he's the most likely character of the Peter Pan cast for them to admit.
To be that one's gay.
That one's gay. Based on the live-action Beauty and the Beast, I think we can safely say Smee is exactly Disney's type of canon queer rep right now.
I just realized I could do an episode about all the various versions of Beauty and the Beast.
Ooh, I love it.
I will.
On that note, do you have anything else you'd like to say about Peter Pan before we wrap? Because I've panned that river
drive
for diamonds. Yeah. Oh, damn, one last thing. Oh, God, I'm just so full of fun facts about Peter Pan. His name, obviously, he's named after Peter, Llewellyn Davies, the real boy, but he's also named after Pan, the mythological figure, and that's why he plays pipes. Boom.
I forgot about the pipe.
Also, he rides a goat at one point.
Oh, my God.
So, there you go. Amanda frantically Googling Peter Pan riding a goat.
No, I'm looking for a fucking line from I'll close this. We'll do our wrap up and I'll close this out with a very meaningful quote from the movie Hook.
Okay, I'm very excited. I can't wait to get to that. So I'll just say goodbye for now, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As always, if you'd like to continue the conversation, you can find us on Twitter at RedPenPod or at our personal Twitters. I am at AustinChanted.
I'm at Amanda H. Jean.
And we also have a Patreon if you are so inclined and would like to toss us a few bucks. We've got plenty of fun behind-the-scenes content and extra snippets, and also you can ask us to do some fun stuff for you, like talk about stuff that you like. And we really appreciate it. And it helps us keep the show going. Look, I just really want to know what you're going to say from the movie Hook.
Okay.
If you love something, cut it up. What are you going to say?
Now you've really just... It's not that good. Okay.
Say it.
This is from Tinkerbell.
Sing for me.
Clap for me. You know that place between sleep and awake? The place where you can still remember dreaming? That's
where I'll always love you. That's where I'll be waiting.
Yep.
Yep.
Bye.